So maybe we can start off talking about the weather. And I think it's really interesting how like humans can embody the weather, right? Like you can feel stormy, you can feel cloudy, but like the weather can also embody people, right? We usually give cyclones names of people. And I think it's really interesting that actually I don't see any nature in these paintings, right? Can you maybe talk to me about like how the weather comes into weatherless scenes?
Into weatherless paintings?
Yeah.
I think it's really about this ideas around the exoticism around tropical places or tropical destinations, and that one would always think that it's a place of happiness and, you know, enjoyment and a sort of vacation or something. And I thought about a kind of a reality of the tropics, really, you know, and also really thinking about climate change. Mm-hmm. And then, so it was me exploring that, but then also being very much honest to where I was at the moment. And I had just left Mozambique, and I, you know, had a bad bout of COVID. And then it took me back to a time that I had malaria. And there was all these sort of layers, and I think that's what makes like a good story. I remember thinking to myself, oh wow, one could really be depressed in the tropics, and there was this looming threat of Cyclone Gombi. So it was that, and then this is also like a show about like sort of relational trauma, or sort of, you know, there's a lot of engagement with sort of a discomfort in the human sort of body language, and that was something I was exploring. So through lapse of time, and then kind of color as like emotional embodiment or something like that. And thinking about color almost as weather patterns, sort of colors to note what the severity is of the sort of caliber of the weather. There was a lot going on.
Clearly. But I think it's interesting. So maybe we jump across time. So like you're talking about the past, but you have something very interesting coming in the future. So I know you're going to a residency at Thread, which is one of my favorite places in the whole world. So Thread, for people that don't know, is the Albers Foundation's residency space on the border of Mali and Senegal. And it's pretty incredible in the sense that the Alberses never spent any time in Africa, but it was the idea of the foundation that these values of the artists weren't bound by geography. They could be lived in other places. And I know Albers and his relationship to color is an inspiration for you. So maybe you can talk a little bit more.
I thought a lot about Albers when I made this body of work, and sort of his sort of gut intuitive connection to color. And I just think that in some ways there's a sort of spiritual approach when one can have a kind of natural connection with color. And I thought also about color in the sense of fauvism, and thinking about Bob Thompson or even Gauguin, or just thinking about sort of these painters that experience faraway places. It's funny how I feel like some of their approach to color is also how I was feeling about the work, you know, like there's like kind of burnt ochres and these pale greens, and then there's these vivid pinks or something that of course show up in art history.
I was just reading this fascinating article. There's this online feminist design platform called Futurist, and it was looking at colonialism found in the color yellow. And it was looking at films and how a lot of these films about global south places have a yellow tint, and looking at what that meant with how we view these places. So I think you were mentioning like artists that went to faraway places. I know like faraway places and film, because you also studied film, are a really important part of how you see the world. And there's something very cinematic about these paintings as well. Maybe could you talk a little bit more about those two life paths?
Right. Yeah. Well, I had experienced something more personal in Mozambique, but then I think there's always something richer when you can make something not about yourself, in my practice at least. So I just wanted to create a rich narrative that I felt that I could maybe leak pieces of human emotion into the figures. Like, we all know what it is to have red eyes. I get red eyes every other day, you know, it's like a fatigue from a long day. And then there's like, I also thought about constraint. I also thought about, you know, a sort of spatial trauma in a way, and I think because of COVID, and I remember the one thing I told myself in Mozambique, I'm like, your goal is to not get COVID, you have to get to Cape Town, you know? And so everyone became too close to me all of a sudden. And then I thought about Edvard Munch's Dance of Life series. So then I thought about holding gestures. And so yeah, I think it's like my mind goes 360, it spirals, I'm pulling everything, and then it's about refinement and to do it as like simple and you know, as elegant as possible. With this body of work, I use pigmented gesso to sort of create these sort of lapses of time. I use sort of like kind of flat colors and then some like more, I don't know, youthful or juvenile colors, because there's kind of a sadness within the figure, so maybe to create some polarity, and I think the show is really about polarity.
I think that's really interesting that you bring up polarity. It's biographical, but I think it's interesting that you have an identical twin, that you also come from like a mixed background of an American father and an African, my correct father, and an African mother. But I think it's also amazing sometimes in these polarities, all the multiplicities that can be found within that. And I think it's also interesting that a lot of these paintings are also pairs of people.
I'm interested in polarity, I'm interested in duality, because I just think that is the essence of life. And I think that's really simple to put it.
Yeah.
So the polarity shows up sometimes in the composition, or it might show up in a sort of expression, you know, and then going back to sort of, you had mentioned cinema. One of my favorite directors from the continent is Diop Jumbril Membeti. One of the films is Hayen, and everything is this sort of golden ochre, like sort of washed green kind of tint. And he managed to make very rich films with nuance in terms of color and gesture. And I think I like to leave a lot of room for us to explore.
Maybe also in duality, like I understand that these paintings like were made in primarily two different places, right? So South Africa and East Hampton, is that correct? Maybe can you talk a bit about the...
So I made the paintings in sort of a residency in Cape Town, and the residency was sort of my laundry room. And I do think that, you know, I'm a painter that likes different spaces to work in. It sort of activates something in me. And I think that has a lot to do with how I grew up, how I was raised. I need different environments, I need different stimulus, like I need different people and culture. My life guides the practice. So I made this work there, and then the last 5 paintings, the black paintings, are a little bit more, I guess, evolved in a sense that there's more of a, I would like to call it like a soulful fraction. There's more like, you know, different squares and boxes, and I start thinking about light entries. And then there's some sort of essence around sort of religious spirituality.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can feel that in those works.
And which was the thing that I felt like was missing here. That these were like real life sort of moments, candid moments. But then I was like, but I'm about the magical real, you know? So I had to throw the magical real in there, you know?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So you studied film, but you're self-taught when it comes to painting. And I'd like to think that we're all self-taught our whole life, that life should be like this kind of journey of learning and seeing, right? Like, and growing. So
curiosity and passion.
Yeah. Some of the artists here that you're referencing or that you came to in your self-taught studies of painting, you were looking at Fauvism, you were looking at Manet, you were looking at Gauguin. Like, what are you looking at now?
Here I'm thinking more so, in the framework of a sort of a cinematic lens, you know. I'm thinking about acting, I'm thinking about, you know, those, I guess, and maybe in some ways I had never felt that I completely succeeded in that in painting, because I don't know if that was what I was exploring. Maybe before I was always exploring like an application of paint, and like, you know, the last show I had in LA was like much more ephemeral, and there was like loose brush strokes, and you can feel there's much more impressionism in that work, where I feel here it's more like Actually, I think I might have been looking also at like Seurat's drawings.
Okay.
And I just felt like I wanted to focus on drawing as the practice, because I'm very like vulnerable with drawing. I don't know why, and it's something I like to do more. And maybe also there's some sort of vulnerability in these paintings as well, that I feel like it's much more rooted in like the human psyche or something.
Yeah. And I think that you have to be very brave to allow yourself to be vulnerable or publicly vulnerable in that way.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'll be vulnerable within the practice, but not really in the narrative. Maybe it should be the other way around, but that's what I did.
Well, there you go, duality.